This is a company most people have never heard of, and this company quite literally owns the world. Most US banks are controlled by BlackRock. BlackRock owns all the major pharmaceutical companies. BlackRock owns most of the mainstream media, and BlackRock oversees roughly 10% of all stocks traded worldwide. And this company is now taking over governments. All of this has allowed BlackRock to amass $10 trillion in assets. Yes, trillion. BlackRock is worth half of America's total GDP. It's so crazy that the US and Chinese government now rely on BlackRock to escape recessions, with BlackRock's founder and CEO now sitting on the boards of the influential Council on Foreign Relations and the World Economic Forum. In the words of Henry Kissinger, whoever controls the money controls the world, and no other company in history has had this much global influence. And what's even crazier is that BlackRock did this in just 34 years. But you want to know the best part? You've probably never heard of them for a reason which will become clearer later on, because after you watch this video, you will soon understand the real-world consequences of BlackRock's vast control.
Full-scale invasion, the likes of which we haven't seen since World War II, of Russia into Ukraine.
And those high gas prices mean the cost of everything that needs to be transported is on the rise.
So then how could BlackRock gain so much influence over the world? How could BlackRock go from being just a boring investment firm to the most powerful company that has ever existed? Well, to start, we have to delve into the past of how Larry Fink made BlackRock. Larry was born into a wealthy Los Angeles family in 1952, and from the start, he was always hungry for power, with his early years spent pursuing a career in politics, where he would gain a BA in political science from UCLA. However, he soon enough realized that politics isn't where the real power is, money is. Following this, he changed his focus early on to go into banking and real estate. And while at college, Fink was immersing himself in the world of the rich and powerful, having been a full-time member of the secretive Kappa Beta Phi, a group that's members included Michael Bloomberg and the Goldman Sachs chairmen. Fink took full advantage of these connections and started a career in the mortgage bond department at First Boston, a boring New York-based investment bank. This was where Larry would make his mark on the financial world, because over his time at First Boston, Fink became one of the highest earning employees, generating over $1 billion. He was unstoppable and it seemed like he was going to be crowned CEO. Larry became an expert in these little understood investments during his time. However, this success didn't come without a price. He wasn't going to make this money for someone other than him, and so he began creating a ticking time bomb, and only he knew how to defuse it. So in 1986, his risky practices and ambition caught up to him. After a few too many risky trades, Larry made a huge blunder. He lost $100 million of this bank's money in just the space of months. All the goodwill and reputation he had gained was crumbling into dust, leading to him being banished from First Boston. It seemed like world domination was just a silly fantasy, that he would never make it to the top. However, Fink wasn't giving up his power this easily. Instead, he would use this disaster to his advantage, vowing to make risk management and avoidance his main focus from now on. And so after becoming unemployed at age 36, Fink would team up with some of his old connections from Kappa Beta Phi, and in 1988, BlackRock was formed. In no time at all, Larry was making bank. In just 5 years, BlackRock went from being worth $5 million to over $8 billion. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. During this time, a power struggle would emerge between who would control BlackRock's future, because Fink wanted a bigger piece of the pie. He didn't want to share his plans for world domination. So in 1995, he would pressure one of the co-founders, Schwartzman, to sell their stake in BlackRock for $250 million. A stake that would now be worth over $12 billion alone. But after these power games, Larry Fink's path to world domination was unstoppable. Larry Fink became more and more powerful over the next decade, but this still wasn't enough for his ambition. Now earlier on, I mentioned a ticking time bomb that Fink helped create in his early days at First Boston. Well, this time bomb was now ready to explode, and in 2008, the worst financial crash since the Great Depression struck the world.
Traders saying this is the craziest day they have ever seen in these markets. Veteran traders saying they've never seen anything like it. The movement in oil prices so fast.
The most serious recession in decades. And that means life, as most Americans know it, is about to change.
And the best part is, this was all under Larry's control. Larry Fink's mortgage-backed securities had been the fuse all along. And because Larry Fink knew the 2008 crash would happen, BlackRock's focus on asset management sealed them from the crisis. In fact, this disaster was an opportunity for Larry Fink, because Larry was the only man on Wall Street who could fix this crisis. And so with Larry's personal connections with the Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, BlackRock secured an uncontested contract to manage the assets of multiple banks that crumbled during the crisis. Exploiting this disaster faster to become the most powerful man on Wall Street. But still, this was only Wall Street. This still wasn't close to world domination. So how could Larry Fink control governments and the world economy? Well, BlackRock made another breakthrough by offering ETFs. Now, this might sound quite technical, but ETFs are a type of investment fund that puts money into all the companies in a certain industry. And these new investment funds proved wildly popular because of the stability and solid returns. And unsurprisingly, BlackRock became the largest player in this new market, reaching the top of its industry, sucking up money from everywhere using its new money management platform. From the biggest banks to the smallest retirement funds, BlackRock had a hand in it all. BlackRock was starting to control everything. They bought stakes in pretty much every major corporation on the stock market. I mean, if you look into who owns pretty much any major company, you're almost guaranteed to find BlackRock's name. Larry could also see the power technology would have in the future economy, which is why BlackRock poured masses of wealth to build a supercomputer that analyzes what investments will make money. This program, named Aladdin, would go on to manage over $20 trillion worth of assets for BlackRock. For context, $20 trillion is more than the entire United States' GDP. BlackRock would then use this money and its assets to further exert their control over the economy, and now they are inextricably tied to governments. And like 2008, the Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage their investments to protect them from coronavirus-led recessions. And BlackRock has used this dependence to grow their empire even further, allowing Larry Fink to be a billionaire oligarch that holds unprecedented power over not just the economy, but the entire world. He controls trends, culture, foreign policy, and the banks. He has world leaders at his beck and call, with BlackRock overseeing assets worth 10% of the world's global economy. BlackRock now owns stakes in every industry, from media companies, banks, oil companies, and weapon manufacturers. And in recent years, the consequences are becoming dire as Larry Fink begins to exert his control over the world. But before we continue, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Masterworks. Masterworks lets you diversify with an asset class millionaires and billionaires use to safeguard their riches: rare art. So why art? Because art is now established alongside things like real estate as a major asset class, with contemporary art prices outpacing the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021. The way it works is Masterworks buys these artworks and securitizes them with the SEC, allowing you to buy shares on their site in an initial offering. These artworks are special purpose vehicles, and you can invest in one of these paintings at a time. And thanks to Masterworks, you don't need to be a millionaire to join in. To get started, click the link in the description and skip the waitlist. Then fill out your information and submit your application to Masterworks. Next, you fill out your investor profile and join their scheduled membership interview, where you'll learn about the mechanics of Masterworks and speak to an art market expert. In the call, you'll go over the different art markets, their significance, and how they've appreciated, whilst also learning the data-driven theses as to why Masterworks selected the respective artworks. Once approved, you can go look at their past offerings and invest in one of their current offerings, like this one by Picasso, where you can view their deal sheet, the investment theses, and the SEC special purpose vehicle documents to see what's been registered with the SEC. And then once you've bought a piece of this art, you can then hold on to it until it's sold, at which point you can cash out, or you can sell your shares on their secondary market. All of this allows you to have a diversified portfolio across art as an asset class. So skip their waitlist and click the Masterworks link in the description below. Now back to the video. One of the ways BlackRock controls the world so well is through its control of the media. Together with Vanguard, an investment company they also partly own, BlackRock now controls 18% of Fox, 16% of CBS, 13% of Comcast, who themselves own NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and Sky, and they even own 12% of Disney. This is very important because it means that for any of these companies to decide on company policy, they must now also consult with BlackRock before doing so. And it's just the same with big tech. BlackRock is now the biggest institutional investor in Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and so many more. I mean, the list of their investments in companies is just endless. And by extending its reach in such a dramatic way, BlackRock now has control over more than 90% of the media, which might also be why you've never heard of them. Because controlling the media is a very important step for BlackRock to take over the world. If everyone knew the consequences of BlackRock owning over $9.5 trillion in assets, some questions might start to be raised. And you see, BlackRock's control isn't just extending through information in the media, but also through the entire world's economic and political data. And as I mentioned before, this is all done through Aladdin, where Aladdin accurately predicts the outcome of every single investment. But the question is, where does Aladdin get this information from? Well, that's where things become very jarring. You see, because of BlackRock's ownership of banks, insurance companies, social media giants, and even pension funds, Aladdin now possesses huge amounts of personal data on everyone. Everyone who has ever knowingly or unknowingly given BlackRock money. And with such a powerful tool under their arsenal, everyone now wants a piece of the pie. And by controlling this much data, BlackRock now controls governments, because BlackRock can use this data to sway companies and even government decisions. For example, BlackRock successfully lobbied to get a contract to manage the EU's regulation of banks. However, this backroom deal is now being investigated as BlackRock themselves own the banks they should be regulating. And this is just one of the many examples of these sorts of actions. A 2016 study in the Journal of Finance documented that investment companies like BlackRock show, quote, widespread behind-the-scenes intervention in the companies that they own stakes in. And this problem only gets worse as BlackRock owns stakes in nearly all major publicly traded companies. And now with our current recession, BlackRock is buying as much homes and real estate as possible, causing regular house prices to skyrocket. BlackRock profits when a society doesn't own their homes but rents, because BlackRock can squeeze even more money out of the economy through mortgaging off these artificially inflated homes. But this whole situation becomes even more sinister when you realize BlackRock's power is now being compromised by other actors. For example, in August 2020, BlackRock became the first foreign company to be allowed access into China's mutual fund industry. This means that BlackRock can now invest and own parts of Chinese companies. God only knows what BlackRock promised Xi Jinping if they're allowed in, but by being allowed in, BlackRock now works with companies that are blacklisted by the US. One example is BlackRock's investment in a CCP-owned company called Hikvision. Hikvision makes security and communications technology for both civilian and military use by the Chinese government, and they're also known for their wide-scale human rights abuses.
How do you think your facial recognition technology will change China?
Everything happened in the public can be recorded.
Now, this money being invested into China isn't just BlackRock's own money. Most of this money comes from the pension funds and bank accounts that ordinary people pay into BlackRock inadvertently. Through BlackRock controlling banks, people have no choice about whether they give BlackRock and the CCP this money. That's if they even know about BlackRock. This recent trend of BlackRock funding authoritarian regimes can only mean bad things for Western democracy, because this empowers regimes like China and Russia. It gives credence to dystopian regimes, and this trend is now promoting others to do the same. I mean, BlackRock recently recommended that their investors triple their investments in China. This would place billions more into a dystopian regime at the expense of the West. And the worst part is that China sees the companies that operate within it as simply extensions of the one-party state. They own these companies, and in return the companies act out the CCP's will, which is a worrying fact when you consider that BlackRock owns the entire world's data. TikTok's data harvesting is nothing compared to BlackRock's. BlackRock knows the entire world's bank details, their preferences, tastes. It sets social trends, it oversees entire countries. So any increase in Chinese investments will see not just BlackRock's influence grow, but also China's influence grow in BlackRock. Since August of 2020, when BlackRock were first allowed into the Chinese economy, they have only poured more and more money into these Chinese companies. Clearly, Aladdin the supercomputer sees this as a profitable move, but what it might not see is the destruction of Western values. It might not see how the CCP could influence the world economy and global politics even more than it already is. It might not see that BlackRock's huge investments will be the catalyst towards this change. I mean, who knows how much more BlackRock will invest in China? But if their growth over the past year is a sign of anything, China will inevitably become a much bigger part of BlackRock's future. And make no mistake, this will have dire consequences. But the cherry on top of all of this is that BlackRock is the main force behind the sheepish woke lecturing that tells you how guilty you should feel. In 2018, around the dawn of the new generation of political correctness, Larry wrote a letter telling all the companies under his thumb to, quote, contribute to society or risk losing our support, adding that, quote, society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose. Which is a very interesting statement coming from a company that is quite literally funding the persecution of Uyghur Muslims and the imprisonment of the Chinese population. A company that is funding a dystopic nuclear regime that is quite literally threatening the very fabric of Western civilization. And so with BlackRock's push for, quote, social purposes, companies now have an ESG score, or in other words, sustainable investing scores, where you have a rating system based on your company's political and social facades. So for example, doing a woke ad for a company like Nike, or silencing any controversial political views on social media will help you get the high ESG score.
They will, on their investor relations page, they'll show you their ESG score. ESG stands for environmental, social, corporate governance. And this is where the woke culture comes from. So they've created this kind of phony baloney rating system that says, well, if you, I'm exaggerating, but if you mention that you are, have a green agenda and you believe in carbon credits and you might trade some credits somewhere, then you get a higher score and therefore you're more investable. And it's very interesting to see how big investors like insurance company, institutional investors, They are steering away from anything that does not have the right ESG rating.
And if the past tells us anything, it seems like BlackRock is only destined to control more and more of our daily lives. Through Larry Fink's close ties with government leaders around the world, with his huge influence over the World Economic Forum, and his position on the boards of the Council on Foreign Relations, BlackRock is only destined to metastasize. So perhaps BlackRock defines the new era of our globalized world, where ruthless, predatory corporations amass more power than countries, where our politics and society isn't dictated by votes, it's dictated by investment boards controlled by BlackRock, delivering us a more generic, mindless, vapid, and vicious culture. Perhaps BlackRock is just a monument to a world divided between too big to fail companies and powerless, moneyless, and joyless citizens, where companies like BlackRock buy up all our houses, inflating our currencies and profit from our conflicts and turmoil. That's why you can't buy a house. That's why we're more divided than ever. That's why too big to fail companies are defining life in the 2020s. Because we no longer live under free market capitalism, we live under a system for socialism for the rich.